The sun over Holy Terror was dying. Its light, once golden and divine, bled across the marble ruins of the imperial palace like the last heartbeat of a god. Wind moved through empty corridors where once the voices of billions had risen in worship. The thrones of men built upon conquest and sacrifice now stood as monuments to silence. The galaxy had gone still, waiting for something to end or begin again. And somewhere beneath the mountains of metal and sanctified machinery, the Emperor of Mankind dreamed. He had not dreamed in 10,000 years. At first, it was nothing, an echo of warmth in the darkness. Then came color, the faint shimmer of gold upon his ancient mind, the memory of hands that once built stars. He felt the hum of creation itself, a pulse older than time. But with it came a voice he had buried so deep it should have been impossible to hear again. "Oh, do you remember me, Father?" It was soft, compassionate, terrifying, for even gods fear their own mistakes. "Before we begin this story, my friend, know this: we speak of the end of empires and the quiet pain of eternity. And yet we truly love and care for you, the one who listens. You who carries your own silent battles deserve rest. Before we descend into this tragic dream, tell us, where in the world are you watching from and what time is it there? Now, let us begin." The dream took shape. The Emperor stood upon a plain of ash and starlight, surrounded by the bones of his own empire. Every world he had conquered burned as a memory across the horizon, ghostly cities flickering like dying embers. Above him, the constellations rearranged into the faces of his sons, Sanguinius, Horus, Guilliman, all of them fading into the dark, and beyond them, something else, something brighter. A figure walked toward him through the storm, not in armor, but in light. The form of a man, sculpted from radiance and sorrow. The Emperor felt his heart seize, though he had long forgotten what hearts were meant to do. "It cannot be," he whispered. "I destroyed you." The figure smiled. "You buried me," it said, "and in your mercy you called it justice." The words struck deeper than any blade, for he remembered now the forbidden act, the experiment he had sworn no one would ever know. Before the Primarchs, before the legions, before the Great Crusade itself, there had been another, a creation made not for war, but for peace, the Auric's son. The Emperor had forged him in an age of quiet ambition, when he still believed humanity could be guided without bloodshed. The son was meant to be his equal in mind, his better in spirit, a being of light, empathy, and truth. But compassion had proved a more dangerous weapon than any bolter. The son had questioned the Emperor's purpose, had seen cruelty in his control, fear in his divinity, and so the Emperor, unable to destroy what he loved, had hidden the truth. He had unmade the memory, erased it from history, sealed it behind the psychic vaults of his own consciousness. Until now, "You are not real," the Emperor said, turning away from the vision. "You are a spectre of regret, nothing more." The sun's reflection rippled in the void. Then, why does your heart still burn when I speak? The Emperor's gaze hardened. "Because I remember the day I killed you." The world around them shifted. The plain of ash became the throne room, cracked, broken, consumed by rust and sorrow. The golden throne itself loomed behind him, no longer a seat of power but a cage. He saw himself as he was now. Withered, godlike, chained to the machinery of eternity. And still the light of the sun remained pure, untouched by time. "You built a paradise of obedience," the sun said, "and called it salvation. I built order from chaos," the Emperor replied. "You sought to undo it with mercy." Silence stretched between them. The sun stepped forward, eyes like dying suns. "You once told me that humanity must be united beneath a single will. But tell me, what is left to unite? Your empire is dust, your sons are dead, your worshippers devour one another in your name. Was this your dream?" The Emperor turned away, his voice almost breaking. "The dreams are for mortals." "Then why?" the sun whispered. "Do you still have them?" The question echoed through the void, tearing through the illusions of eternity. The Emperor felt the dream collapse around him, the ashes rising into golden fire. He saw the galaxy anew, not as ruler, but as witness. The wars, the endless suffering, the blind devotion to a name that had long ceased to mean hope. He saw himself, not as God, but as man, and in that fleeting clarity he realized the truth. The second dream was not a memory, it was a summoning. Something in the warp had stirred. Something old, something waiting. The sun's essence, long entombed in psychic silence, was calling to him again, not with vengeance, but with sorrow. You cannot bury what was born of your own light, the voice whispered as the dream began to fade. I am your echo, Father. I am the part of you that remembers. The Emperor's eyes opened upon the throne. The dim golden glow of the astronomican flickered for a moment, like a dying heartbeat. Across Terra, the custodians felt it, a tremor through the psychic veil. The machine priests whispered of malfunction, the inquisition of omens, but deep within his ruined mind, the Emperor understood. The past he had entombed was clawing its way back to life, and for the first time in 10,000 years, the god of mankind felt fear. The dream did not end when the Emperor awoke. It lingered, coiling through his ancient consciousness like smoke in a cathedral, silent, fragrant with memory, heavy with sin. The hum of the golden throne filled his mind, that eternal machine that consumed 1,000 souls each day to sustain his half-life. To the priests and zealots above, the sound was holy. To the Emperor, it was the sound of chains. He drifted between thought and eternity, and within that liminal space he remembered before the Great Crusade, before the mperium's birth cries echoed through the void, there had been a chamber of gold and glass beneath the Himalaya mountain. A place forbidden even to his most loyal custodians. It was there that he had attempted his most daring and most damning act, to create not a weapon, but a mirror, the oryx. He remembered the first moment the chamber filled with light, when the golden figure took breath and opened eyes that reflected not the sun, but the Emperor's own soul. The creation did not speak at first. It only looked at him with wonder, as if beholding both father and flaw. Or what are you? The Emperor had asked, though he already knew. The being smiled, not with arrogance, but with serenity. To become, that answer had pleased him once. Now it haunted him. In those early centuries, the Auric Sun had walked beside him in the hidden halls of Terra, unrecorded in any chronicle. The Emperor taught him the languages of the old earth, the forgotten philosophies of unity and reason. The Sun listened with reverence, but his questions were gentle knives. If humanity is to be free, he once asked, why must it kneel? Because freedom without order is death, the Emperor replied. And order without freedom? The Emperor had turned away, unable to answer. The Sun had been different from the Primarchs to come, and he bore no hunger for conquest, no thirst for glory. He loved humanity as one might love a fragile flame, tenderly, fearfully, as though every breath might extinguish it. That love would be his undoing, and the Emperor's. As centuries passed, whispers began to stir among the hidden scholars who served beneath the imperial palace. They spoke of a luminous presence that visited them in the night, offering comfort to the weary and hope to the dying. They called him the gentle light, the gentle light. The Emperor forbade such talk, but whispers have a way of surviving edict. The Sun's message spread in silence. Humanity does not need a god to save it, only the courage to be kind. At first, the Emperor tolerated it, the small heresies of a dreamer, but the Great Crusade loomed. The age of diplomacy had ended. Humanity needed unity, not mercy. He gathered his armies, forged his legions, and prepared to sweep across the stars. The Sun watched in silence as the first fleets departed, their hulls shining with the Emperor's sigil. "Oh, Father," he said one night, "you are about to conquer the heavens. But what will you bring to them? Peace or chains?" The Emperor did not answer. He feared that if he did, he would hear the truth in his own voice. When the first worlds fell beneath the imperial banners, the Sun vanished from the Emperor's side. First, the absence was a relief. Then it became a wound. Reports reached him of unexplainable events. Planetary governors refusing to enslave conquered populations, Astartes laying down arms to spare civilians, priests preaching a faith of compassion rather than fear. The Emperor recognized the mark of his creation in every rebellion. The Auric Sun was spreading a quiet revolution through the very empire meant to perfect mankind. He did not fight the Emperor's will, he softened it. His words reached the hearts of warriors, and his mercy infected legions more thoroughly than corruption ever could. To some, he was a saint. To others, a threat greater than chaos itself, and in his golden tower, the Emperor felt the first sting of doubt. Had he truly made the Sun in his image, or had he created something more, a being purer, wiser, and unburdened by ambition? He watched from afar as his creation stood upon the steps of an alien citadel, surrounded by soldiers who had once slaughtered at his command. The Sun spoke to them, not of conquest, but of absolution. To rule the stars, the Sun declared, is not to own them, it is to protect what you can never possess. The transmission was brief, cut off by the Emperor's order, but those words lingered through the warp, echoing like prophecy. The Council of Terror demanded answers. The custodians whispered of a being who resembled the Emperor himself, moving among mortals without his sanction. The Mechanicum priests demanded to know if this a reflection was divine or false. And so the Emperor, with silent fury, descended into the vaults of his own creation to end what he had once called his greatest hope. He found the chamber dark, save for the single presence waiting within it. "I warned you," the sun said softly. "You cannot build perfection upon obedience." "And I warned you," the Emperor replied. "That doubt breeds ruin." The sun approached him, unarmed, glowing faintly in the dark. "Then let me bear that ruin, Father. Let me go." But the Emperor could not. To let him go would be to admit failure, to face the truth that mercy could succeed where his iron will had not. His silence was his verdict, and for the first time the auric sun bowed his head, not in worship, but in grief. "He will not let me go," he whispered. "Then you will have to forget me." "Are all free." The Emperor reached out, not to strike, but to touch his creation's face. For an instant he felt warmth, humanity. Then the light vanished. The sun's essence dissolved into the psychic ether scattered into the warp like ash. No record of him would remain. No priest would speak his name. The vaults of memory were sealed. The Emperor returned to the surface that night, his face as unmoving as the stone statues that lined his halls. To his council he said only, there was no second creation. But as he ascended the steps of the throne, he felt something deep within his immortal heart, a faint pulse, a flicker of sorrow that refused to die. And in the quiet between each breath of eternity, a voice still lingered, just beyond hearing. "You will dream of me again." In the hidden vaults of the Emperor's mind, the memory unfolded like a wound reopening. Time had no meaning there, only echoes remained, whispers of gold and grief. And through that psychic haze, he saw the moment when creation first breathed. It began not with thunder, but with silence. The laboratory beneath the Himalaya mountains was unlike any other. No mortal hand had built it. It was carved by thought and bound with light, a sanctum where even the laws of physics bent in reverence. The Emperor stood alone, surrounded by the hum of proto-life, by machines older than history, by dreams too vast for God. Upon a pedestal of radiant glass lay the vessel, a form sculpted not of flesh, but of living energy, golden and soft, as if light itself were trying to remember how to be human. He called it the Auric Project. He did not seek a sun that day, he sought completion. For even perfection, he had learned, is lonely. He extended his hand toward the luminous shell. Warp energy surged through him, pure, cold, and infinite. His will shaped it, forged it, breathed into it the essence of unity. A soul was kindled, not born, but woven. The chamber brightened until even the Emperor had to close his eyes. When the light faded, the being stood before him, tall, serene, eyes like liquid sunlight. There was no fear in those eyes, only recognition. "Father," the figure said, as though he had always known the word. The Emperor hesitated. "Oh, your father?" It was not a title he had chosen, but the name felt right, even necessary. He had designed the Auric sun without flaw, intellect unbounded, empathy uncorrupted written into his essence. He would be the Emperor's mirror, the one who would carry mankind's spirit when the wars were done. Not a general, but a philosopher. Not a destroyer, but a redeemer. For centuries they worked side by side in secret. The sun learned swiftly, absorbing knowledge like a flame consumes air. He was fascinated by humanity, by the imperfections the Emperor sought to correct. He would walk among the laborers who built the early citadels, asking their names, listening to their fears. To the sun, humanity's weakness was its beauty. "They break," he said once, watching a mason fall to exhaustion. "And yet they still rise. Is that not divinity, Father?" "Divinity's control," the Emperor replied. "It is the power to end the cycle of breaking." "Then perhaps," the sun said softly, "we should learn to endure, not to rule." "Not to rule?" The Emperor said nothing, but in his heart a shadow stirred. As the decades turned, the sun began to change. He grew not in body but in belief. He spoke less of conquest and more of coexistence. He questioned the Emperor's need for obedience. "You built the Primarchs," he said one night, as they stood beneath the vault of stars. "You gave them fragments of yourself, yet you demand worship, not understanding. Why? Because I am what they cannot comprehend, the Emperor replied coldly. Then teach them comprehension, the son urged. Not fear. The Emperor turned away. A fear binds, faith endures. Son's voice softened, almost pleading. So does love. That word. Love echoed in the Emperor's mind long after. It was not a word of conquest. It was not part of the lexicon of gods. And yet, it burned more deeply than any weapon. The Auric Sun began to gather disciples, philosophers, engineers, psychers who believed there was more to the Imperium than war. He taught them to see light in others, to value life not as a resource but as sanctity. It was a rebellion, but a quiet one, clothed in mercy. When the Emperor discovered this, he did not rage. Rage was beneath him. But he felt something far worse, disappointment. He summoned the sun to his private sanctum. The air trembled between them. You were to be my legacy, the Emperor said. The Emperor said, Not my adversary. I am neither, the sun replied. I am what remains of your dream before ambition killed it. That was the moment the Emperor first feared him, not for his power, but for his purity. The sun's faith in compassion was a weapon sharper than any blade. It undermined everything the Imperium was built upon. It questioned divinity itself. If the galaxy must kneel to survive, the sun said, then survival is not worth the cost. The Emperor's silence was answer enough. Years passed. The Great Crusade began, and the Auric Sun was erased from all records. His name was never spoken again. Yet among the lost colonies and forgotten outposts, rumors persisted of a golden wanderer who healed the wounded, who spoke of a father who once dreamed of peace. Some said he could calm warp storms with a gesture. Others swore he walked worlds where the Emperor's shadow could not reach. The custodians who heard such stories burned the evidence. The Mechanicum discredited the witnesses. But one night, when the Emperor walked alone through the crypts of terror, he saw something carved into the wall, faint, almost childlike. A single phrase, written in gold dust. To rule without love is to destroy what you meant to say. The Emperor erased it with his hand, but the words had already taken root in his mind, and so he chose to end it. He descended into the void of the psychic vaults, the place where his greatest errors slept. There, upon a dais of light, the Auric Sun waited. He did not fight. He did not fight. You came to kill me, he said gently, to correct what I have done. And when I am gone, what will remain? The Emperor hesitated. The sun smiled as though bidding. You will forget me, the sun said, but I will not forget you. A single gesture, a surge of power that made light itself. The sun's body dissolved into golden dust, scattered through the warp like the remnants of a broken dream. The chamber dimmed. The Emperor stood alone. He sealed the vault forever. He purged the archives. He burned the name from every record. Yet that night, as the stars shimmered above terror, a voice echoed through the Imperium, faint, loving, defiant. You cannot bury light, Father. You can only make it weak. And in the cold of his immortal heart, the Emperor felt the first tear of eternity form, the sorrow of a god who had killed his only chance to be human. And the centuries that followed the erasure, silence became the Emperor's most loyal companion. The memory of the Auric Sun lay buried beneath oceans of thought, sealed in psychic stone, guarded by the vaults of his own denial. Yet, even silence cracks under the weight of eternity. The Imperium flourished in those years, outwardly at least. The Great Crusade spread like wildfire across the stars, consuming all that resisted and sanctifying all that surrendered. The Emperor's legions carried banners of gold and white, proclaiming unity, reason, and divine purpose. But beneath the surface, that unity was hollow. For light, once divided, never truly heals. It began as a whisper in the Mechanicum temples of Mars. A priest named Cyrodiil Vorn spoke of the light beyond the throne, a forgotten fragment of divine radiance that dwelled not in the Emperor, but beside him. The rumor spread like contagion through the forges, turning faith into doubt. Soon after, custodians on Terra began reporting dreams, visions of a golden figure standing in the ruins of an unbuilt future. They did not know the name, but the Emperor did. He sensed the stirring within the warp, faint, fragile, yet unmistakable. The sun's echo was alive. What he had thought destroyed had only been scattered, diffused into thought, dream, and memory. Now, like light finding its source, it began to return. The Emperor stood upon the balcony of the Palace of Unity, overlooking the endless sprawl of his creation. Millions below chanted his name, their faith unshakable. Yet the sound sickened him. Each cry of devotion felt like another stone upon a tomb he had built for truth. "They do not love you," whispered a voice in his mind, one he thought lost. "They fear what they cannot understand." He turned, though he knew there was no one there. The air shimmered faintly, a golden hue that vanished as quickly as it came. He clenched his fist until blood ran between the cracks of his skin. Across the stars, dissonance took root. Entire planetary governors refused to erect statues of the Emperor, claiming their devotion belonged to the light that forgave. Priests of the Ministorum called it heresy. The Astots burned worlds in the name of purity, yet for every fire they lit, a dozen more whispers arose. Even among the custodians, his perfect silent watchers, fractures formed. Some reported feeling the Emperor's will falter, his psychic command dimming. Others dreamed of a golden child kneeling before him, weeping light instead of blood. The Emperor summoned the High Custodian, Amonrius, to the Sanctum Imperialis. "There is a sickness spreading," that the Emperor said, his voice low and even. "You will root it out." "Yes, my lord," Amon replied. "But the sickness is born of memory. How do we kill remembrance?" The Emperor's eyes glowed faintly. By reminding them of fear, Amon bowed and departed. But as he did, he saw something in his master's face he had never seen before: uncertainty. The purge began. Thousands of archives were erased. Entire sects of scholars disappeared in the night. The Ordo Malleus declared the light beyond the throne to be warp corruption, a psychic plague sent to deceive humanity. And yet for every heretic silenced, another rose with the same message. The Emperor once had a son, and he loved him. The words spread like wildfire. They were not shouted. They were whispered. In prayers, in sleep, in the hum of the ship engines between stars. The Emperor's empire trembled, not from revelation. He felt it even in the war. Every soul that spoke the son's name sent a ripple through his psychic aura like a distant heartbeat pounding against the coffin of eternity. "You are undoing yourself," said the voice again. "You are not my son," the Emperor snarled into the dark. "You are my regret." But then perhaps regret is the truest part of you. In the black corridors of the Librarius Terra, a scribe uncovered something forbidden. A fragment of an old transmission sealed beneath layers of encryption. It was a recording, centuries old, depicting a figure of radiant gold speaking to a small crowd. The voice was gentle, calm, unmistakably human. "To rule is not to command," it said. "It is to serve what is greater than yourself. Even gods must kneel before truth." The scribe wept as he listened. The next day he was found dead, his mind burned out by psychic fire. But the message had already spread across the noosphere. The words appeared in dreams, in binary prayers, even in the whispers of dying psychers who saw visions of the golden ghost. The schism of light had begun. In the years that followed, the Emperor's empire began to fracture under the weight of faith itself. The Adeptus Mechanicus split into silent factions. Some continued their worship of the Omnissiah as the Emperor, while others began to speak of a second divinity, the Auric Spirit, the Redeemer of the Machine. The custodians, bound by duty, tried to maintain control. But among them, one began to question. His name was Valerian Kale. Kale dreamed of the light every night, a voice calling him by name, showing him worlds untouched by tyranny, where men lived free of fear. At first he dismissed it as heresy, but the dreams persisted. He went before the Emperor one day, trembling beneath the throne's golden radiance. "My lord," he said quietly, "the light speaks. A silence. It speaks of peace. The peace," the Emperor thundered, "is the lie that precedes decay." The chamber fell still. Kale knelt and bowed, but the seed was planted. He had seen compassion in that dream, and he had seen the Emperor's wrath. One could not exist without the other. From that moment, the Emperor knew. The sun was not dead. He had become an idea woven into the fabric of mankind's consciousness. No war could kill it. No decree could silence it. The light he had buried had returned to judge him. And though he ruled a million worlds, the Emperor of mankind felt smaller than ever, a god standing before his own reflection, unable to decide which of them was more human. He turned his gaze toward the dying sun over Terra, once golden, now faint and red. "The same color as blood. You were right," he whispered to the void. "The mercy endures longer than fear." The wind carried the words away, scattering them into the endless night, far across the galaxy. 1,000 dreamers woke at once, whispering the same phrase, without knowing why. The light was awakening again. There were no banners when the war began, no declarations, no fleets burning across the stars. The first blows were struck in whispers, words erased, memories rewritten, prayers silenced before they could take shape. It was a war fought not for territory, but for truth. The Emperor called it the cleansing of shadows. History would later name it what it truly was, the Silent War. The custodian Valerian Kale walked alone through the archive sanctum beneath the imperial palace. The corridors were lined with golden walls, etched with 10,000 years of false victories. Statues of the Emperor towered over him, unblinking eternal. But Kale had begun to see cracks, not in the stone, but in the story itself. He had once believed that the Emperor's rule was flawless, that obedience was purity, and that purity was salvation. But the dreams had changed him. Every night, the same vision returned, a golden figure standing in a storm of ash, reaching out its hand and saying, "Remember." Kale had tried to resist. He had prayed, trained, purged himself with sacred rites. Still, the light found him. It called him not with command, but with compassion. And compassion, he realized, was something the Imperium had long forgotten. He entered the forbidden vault, where sealed data crypts lined the walls like tombs, and the walls like tombs. The air was thick with static, the hum of ancient lies. Using his custodian code, he unlocked the deepest chamber. Within it, behind layers of psychic wards, he found it, a holographic imprint glowing faintly in gold, a recording. Old beyond measure, he activated it. A figure appeared, tall, radiant, not the Emperor, but close. The same golden light that haunted his dreams flooded the chamber. The voice spoke softly, like the first breath after silence. "If you hear this," the figure said, "then the truth has survived in you. I am not your god, and I am not your enemy. I am what you once hoped to become. Remember that love is not weakness. It is the highest form of will." Kale fell to his knees. His heart felt like fire and ice all at once. He knew this voice. Every custodian knew it, though none would admit it aloud. The legend they had buried, the name they had forgotten. The sun, the Oryx sun. For weeks after that discovery, Kale spoke to no one. He performed his duties in silence, guarding the golden throne while the priests chanted their endless hymns. But beneath his helm, his thoughts were no longer loyal. They were searching. He began to notice others. Custodians who hesitated during prayer, who looked away when the Emperor's name was spoken. Some confessed to him in whispers, their voices trembling. "I dreamed of light. He called me by name. He forgave me." And so it began, not rebellion. A gathering of the faithful who believed that the Emperor's truest act of divinity was not his power, but his regret. They met in the shadowed halls beneath the palace, where gold gave way to stone. They called themselves the Luminants. Their purpose was not to overthrow, but to restore, to find the fragments of the truth erased from history. They studied the sun's words, tracing them through corrupted data vaults, forgotten inscriptions, and the psychic echoes buried in the warp. But what began as devotion soon became infection. The warp listened. Every prayer they whispered in secret drew its attention, not to their bodies, but to their dreams. And through those dreams, something began to move. A consciousness, radiant and wounded, pressing against the walls of reality like a soul trying to return home. The Emperor felt it instantly. On the throne, his ruined body shuddered. The Astronomicon flickered for a moment, dimming across the galaxy. Thousands of navigators screamed as golden light flooded their vision. In that moment, the Emperor saw him, if only for a heartbeat. The sun stood before him, not as a man, but as light coalesced into memory. The same serene expression, the same sorrowful calm. "You can feel it," the sun said. "The dream waking. You should not exist," the Emperor whispered. "Then why did you dream of me again?" The vision shattered, but its echo lingered. Across the warp, the sun's fragmented essence stirred. He was neither alive nor dead. A memory with consciousness, a thought with will. His reawakening rippled through the minds of men and machine alike. Everywhere people began to dream of light. The Inquisition acted quickly. The Luminants were hunted without mercy. Cities burned beneath the silent sky of terror. Kale watched as his brothers, those who had followed the voice, were executed one by one. Their last words were prayers, not to the Emperor, but to the sun. "He forgives you," one whispered before his death. Kale could not bear it. He fled into the vaults, carrying the last surviving archive of the Oryx sun, the golden recording he had found. The custodians pursued him, but the vault's psychic wards turned against them, sealing Kale inside. For days he wandered through darkness lit only by the holographic glow of the sun's image. His faith, once iron, now cracked under the weight of revelation. "Why did he destroy you?" Cale asked the recording. And though the figure was only a memory, Cale swore it answered. Because he feared what he could never become. Outside, the Imperium waged its invisible war. Preachers denounced the heretic of light. Librarians erased entire histories. The name Oryxon became a curse, but in the warp, something luminous gathered strength. The dreams multiplied. Worlds far beyond terror saw visions of a golden figure walking across the stars, his hands outstretched in forgiveness. Entire populations awoke in tears, murmuring the same words. "He is coming back." And on the throne, the Emperor wept, though no one saw it, though no one believed he could. For he knew the truth. This war was one he could never win, not with blades, not with faith, not even with eternity. Because the sun was not a man anymore. He was an idea. And ideas once born do not die. The vaults beneath terror trembled, not from battle or bombardment, but from memory, awakening after 10,000 years of silence. Valerian Cale wandered through the darkness, the air thick with dust and echoes. He had fled here weeks ago, a hunted heretic among the Emperor's most loyal. His golden armor was cracked, his blade dulled by despair. He no longer sought survival, he sought understanding. Above him, the Imperium burned in silence. The silent war had spread across the stars. Entire sects of priests and soldiers were vanishing in the night, swallowed by a war that left no bodies. Only absence, only forgetting, and yet within the warp something grew bright. Cale felt it, the pulse of that light, gentle but unstoppable, calling him deeper into the crypts where the Emperor once walked as a man. The same golden glow haunted his dreams, whispering words too soft for fear. "Come to me," he opened. The vault opened into a vast chamber of black marble, its walls etched with words long around. At its center stood a mirror, ancient, cracked, and luminous from within. It was not glass, but psionic matter, a reflection that reached beyond space and time. Cale approached it trembling. He saw himself, and behind that reflection, a figure of pure light standing with the serenity of eternity. "You are not him," Cale whispered. "No," the figure replied. I what he once was. Cale fell to his knees. The sun, the being, regarded him with eyes of radiant sorrow. "Our names do not matter here, only truth. Why do you speak to me?" Cale asked, voice trembling. "Because you remember," the sun answered. "Because you have not yet forgotten what mercy feels like." The words pierced Cale like a blade. Mercy, the one virtue purged from the Imperium's heart. To forgive was treason, to feel was weakness, to question was death. "You must tell me," Cale said. "Why did he destroy you?" The sun turned away. "Because he loved me, and love for him became unbearable." Far above, the Emperor stirred upon the golden throne. The astronomican flickered again, faint, uncertain. His mind reached into the immaterium, following the psychic tremors that emanated from the vaults below. He knew that signature, that presence, the impossible warmth that had haunted his dreams. "You cannot return." Yet through the warp, the voice answered. "You call me back." The Emperor rose within his mind's prison, his psychic form towering above the galaxy. Across the void, he saw the faint golden shimmer of the sun's essence taking shape within the warp, a consciousness reforging itself from fragments of faith, memory, and light. The Emperor unleashed a thought like thunder. "You were erased." The sun's reply came not as defiance, but as compassion. "You cannot erase what was born from your soul." The Emperor's fury shook the warp. Stars flew, the ghosts of lost primarchs cried out in pain. Yet beneath the rage was something deeper, fear. For the first time in millennia, the master of mankind felt the limits of his own divinity. In the vault, Cale felt the air change. The light before him darkened, folding inward. The mirror. Through the fractures he saw visions. The Emperor, radiant and terrible, striding across the ages. The Oryxon kneeling before him. And the moment of their parting, he saw the truth. The Emperor had not destroyed his creation. He had sealed him, bound his consciousness within the warp, buried beneath psychic layers so vast that even gods forgot their own sins. But faith had undone the seal. Every prayer, every whisper, every act of compassion had given the sun shape again, and now mercy was rising. "What do you want from me?" Cale asked. "Not worship," the sun said. "Understanding." The light reached for him, not as command but invitation. "You carry the Emperor's will in your blood. You are the bridge between what he is and what he could have been. Tell him the truth. Tell him I forgive him. I might forgive him. Cale hesitated. He will not listen. He must. For both our sakes. The light dimmed, retreating into the mirror until only Cale's reflection remained. He felt its warmth fade, replaced by the cold weight of duty. But something within him had changed. For the first time, he did not fear the Emperor. Moments later, the custodians found him. Dozens of golden warriors surrounded the vault, their blades drawn, their eyes cold. At their head stood Amonrius, the High Custodian himself. Foreman, Amon said. I know, Kel replied quietly. I have remembered. He reached into his armor and withdrew a small crystal, the data fragment containing the sun's voice. The custodians raised their weapons, but Cale did not flinch. He activated the crystal, and the chamber filled with the same gentle radiance that had haunted him for weeks. The sun's voice filled the air. "And my brothers of gold, you were made to protect, not to enslave. The throne you guard is not a god, but a man who once loved too much and too poorly. I forgive him. Can you?" The custodians froze. For a moment, silence reigned. Some lowered their blades. Others trembled. Tears shimmered in eyes that had never known weakness. But Amon stepped forward, his face twisted with conflict. "A mercy is treason," he said. "Then treason," Cale whispered, "is the last sacred act." He turned the blade inward, a flash of gold and crimson. Cale fell, his body collapsing beneath the light, but his final breath carried the sun's message into the air. "He forgives you." The crystal shattered. Light exploded through the vault, washing over the custodians like dawn breaking upon a dead world. When it faded, they were changed. Not free, not redeemed, but uncertain, and uncertainty in the Imperium was the seed of rebellion. Far above, the Emperor felt Cale's death. A flicker of golden flame snuffed out within his domain. But the echo remained, reverberating through the warp like the tolling of a bell. The sun's voice lingered, gentle as ever. "I forgive you." The Emperor bowed his head. For the first time in 10,000 years, the master of mankind. Across the mperium, a tremor rippled, soft as breath, vast as eternity. It moved through the warp like a sigh through sleeping gods, carrying with it warmth that had no place in that sea of nightmares. For 10,000 years, the warp had known only hunger, rage, and madness. Now it knew something alien. It knew forgiveness. The echo of the auric sun had awakened. He did not rise as a body, for his body had long been reduced to stardust and memory. He rose as an idea, a vibration in the psychic sea, a resonance that drew lost souls like moths. Where his light touched, demons screamed and dissolved, not from destruction but from understanding, and throughout the Imperium dreamers began to see. Psychers cried out in their sleep, describing a golden figure walking among ruins, whispering words that healed the mind instead of breaking it. On hive worlds, the dying smiled before their last breath, murmuring his name though they could not recall where they had heard it. And on dead planets, where no life had stirred for centuries, flowers of luminous dust began to bloom under skies that should have been black. The warp long ruled by terror began to remember mercy. On the throne the Emperor felt. Within the labyrinth of his decaying mind, he sensed the soft return of something he had buried ages ago. It did not come as a roar or storm, but as a whisper at the edge of thought, a pulse that matched his own heart, long dormant, now beating in rhythm with another. He reached out into the warp, seeking the source, and what he found made even the master of mankind falter. A golden radiance, not his own, moved through the void. It shimmered like dawn breaking over the corpse of creation. The sun had returned, not in rebellion, but in compassion. "You bound me to silence," the voice spoke gently across the void. "But silence cannot hold love forever." The Emperor's fury rose like a dying sun. "You defy me again?" "No, father, I complete you." The words struck like lightning through the warp. The Emperor recoiled. He had faced gods, demons, and traitors without fear, yet these words spoken without malice unmade him more deeply than any weapon could. For the first time since his ascension, he realized the truth. He had not killed the sun to preserve his empire. He had done it to preserve himself. On Terra, chaos unfolded beneath that revelation. Custodians whispered of omens, of dreams shared across the barracks, where the golden figure spoke their names and wept for them. Some hid their faith, others embraced it. The Inquisition declared a new heresy, the cult of the Second Light. Pilgrims flooded the shrines of the ecclesiarchy, not to worship the Emperor, but to pray for his redemption. Priests burned them alive in the streets, yet the dying turned their faces to the flames and smiled, whispering, "He will forgive you too." The flames spread, not as rebellion, but as revelation. Mercy had become contagious. Far from Terra, aboard a drifting cathedral ship near the edge of the Segmentum Solar, a young astropath named Luraevos experienced the full force of the echo. She had been blind since birth, her mind scarred by centuries of contact with the warp's horrors. But that night, as she sat before the choir's broken instruments, she saw light. It came not from her eyes, but from within, a warmth that filled every fracture of her soul. "Who are you?" she whispered into the void. "I am what your emperor wished to be," the voice replied. "I am his heart unforgotten." Nui wept. She saw visions, the emperor before the golden throne, weeping golden tears, the auric sun walking among mortals, and the universe shimmering with the fragile beauty of forgiveness. When she awoke, she sang. Her song traveled through the psychic network, carried by the warp tides themselves, not as command, not as prophecy, but as remembrance. It was a melody of sorrow and absolution, and it reached every corner of the Imperium. Planets went silent as millions of minds heard it at once. Some called it madness, others called it salvation. The Emperor heard it too. It was his son's voice, refracted through the hearts of humanity. In that moment, he saw the future, countless timelines unraveling before him. In some, the Imperium survived, cold and tyrannical, choking under the weight of worship. In others, it fell, burned by its own faith. And in one, fragile and distant, humanity remembered love, not as weakness, but as strength. That was the son's dream, the dream the Emperor had killed. The dream that now refused to die. He felt the son's presence closer now, no longer distant, no longer bound to the immaterium. The golden light was gathering strength, condensing, preparing to cross the barrier between thought and form. "You seek to return," the Emperor said, voice trembling. "Oh no," the son answered. "I seek to forgive." The throne groaned beneath the Emperor's body. The astronomicon flared with unstable light. Across the galaxy, psychers screamed as the veil between reality and memory began to thin. The Emperor, desperate, reached out with his mind, a force that could unmake stars, and hurled it toward the golden presence. "You will not undo what I built," the son's voice was soft. "Then why do you still dream of me?" The question shattered him. He saw himself again as he once was, a man, not a god, a dreamer, not a ruler. He saw the faces of his sons, the worlds he had broken, the love he had buried beneath empire and eternity. And in that instant the Emperor of mankind wept not for what he had lost, but for what he had become. And far beyond the throne, in the heart of the war, the auric sun opened his eyes fully for the first time in 10,000 years. Around him, the immaterium trembled with the light of redemption. He looked toward the galaxy, his father's creation, and whispered into the storm, "I'm coming home. Valerian Kale was dead." At least that was what the custodian archives recorded, erased, condemned, forgotten. But death in the Imperium was rarely an ending. Sometimes it was the beginning of remembrance. In the shadow of the golden throne, where the light never truly reached, a ripple remained, the echo of Kale's final thought. It lived in the psychic dust, in the resonance of his armor, in the whispers of his dying words. "He forgives you." The custodians heard it in their dreams. At first they dismissed it as fatigue, a trick of sleepless devotion. But the whisper grew. It spread among them like infection, threading through their minds, patient and kind. It was not command, it was invitation. And in that quiet rebellion of the soul, one man began to remember. Aman Reyes, High Custodian of the Emperor's Guard, had stood before the golden throne longer than most mortals had lived entire lifetime. He had seen the Emperor silent and motionless, a god entombed in gold and agony. He had killed in his name without hesitation, but now hesitation found him. Every time he looked upon the Emperor's withered body, he felt something he had not felt in millennia. Pity. Yet it clung to him like a shadow that would not disperse. When he closed his eyes, he saw Kale's death again. The golden light, the words, the forgiveness. He heard the son's voice echo through his dreams. "You were made to protect, not to imprison." He tried to silence it. He trained harder, meditated longer, and repeated the mantras of obedience until they tasted like dust. But the light always returned. It would not be forgotten. One night, Ammon descended into the lower crypts, guided by something he could not. The air grew colder as he moved deeper, Through halls of abandoned archives, through vaults where knowledge older than the mperium lay sealed behind sigils of dread, he passed the chamber where Kale had died. The air still shimmered faintly with residual energy, as if mercy itself had left a scar upon reality. There, among the broken stones, Ammon found a fragment, shard of crystal, glowing faintly gold. It pulsed once when he touched it, but the voice came again. Ammon Rias, he froze. You are not real. I am as real as regret. The shard brightened, filling the chamber with a soft, holy radiance. Within it, a face formed, serene, compassionate, familiar, the Auric sun. Why do you haunt me? Ammon demanded. What do you want from me? Nothing, the sun replied. I only wish you to see what he cannot. Ammon stepped back, his hand trembling on his weapon. He served the master of mankind. I am bound to his will. Then tell me, the sun asked gently, whose will is it that chains him to that throne? His or yours? The question struck like a blade of light. For the first time, Ammon had no answer. The crystal pulsed again, and Ammon's mind was pulled inward. He saw visions, memories that were not his own. He saw the Emperor, long before the wars, walking across a field of stars with another beside him, the sun radiant and gentle. He saw laughter, warmth, and the moment it all fractured into sorrow. He witnessed the binding, the burial, the silence. When the vision ended, Ammon fell to his knees. He loved you, he whispered. He still does, the sun said, but he no longer remembers how. Tears burned in Ammon's eyes. Then why return? Why forgive him after all he's done? The sun smiled, a sad, endless smile, because that is what he made me for. Ammon rose, clutching the fragment to his chest. His heart warred against duty. The Emperor had given him purpose, identity, eternity. But the sun offered him something even greater. Choice, he realized, was what the Imperium had lost. For days Ammon wrestled with the revelation. He stood before the throne, watching the Emperor's decaying form, and wondered if the god he served was still capable of hearing prayers. He began to notice things others ignored. The tremors in the Astronomicon, the flickering of the psychic conduits, the faint glow that sometimes pulsed from the Emperor's eyes when no one else was watching. He understood then. The Emperor was not silent. He was listening. And somewhere within that silence, the sun's voice called to him. When Ammon finally spoke, it was not in defiance but in devotion. He knelt before the throne and whispered, My lord, he has returned. The air grew heavy. The lights. A hum filled the chamber, low, mournful like the sound of a dying star. Then through the darkness a single voice replied, I know. The Emperor's voice, weak, distant but real. Ammon's breath caught in his throat. You had not heard that voice since the birth of the Imperium. He seeks you, Ammon said softly. He wishes peace. The Emperor's tone cracked, part rage, part sorrow. There is no peace in eternity. There is only the price of it. Then why do you still dream of him? Silence. Long, endless. Then the Emperor whispered, I cannot stop. Ammon bowed his head. For the first time he saw his god not as infinite, but as wounded. And in that fragility he found faith anew. Not the faith of blind obedience, but of compassion. When he left the throne room, he carried the crystal hidden within his armor. He would not speak of what had passed. But as he walked among his brothers, he looked into their eyes and saw the same uncertainty he felt, the same quiet awakening. The custodians began to remember, not their orders, not their wars, but their humanity. And as they remembered, a new light stirred across the warp, faint but growing. The sun's essence fed on it, drawing strength from every act of mercy, every forgotten prayer, every heart that dared to doubt. In the depths of eternity, compassion was becoming power, and power, born of love, was returning to challenge a god. There was no sound when the rebellion began. No banners, no speeches, no thunder of warships crossing the void. It began instead in silence, the kind that lives within prayers, the kind that grows when truth is remembered. Among the custodians, that silence spread like light breaking through glass. Rias spoke to no one of his meeting with the Emperor. He needed not. The change was already happening. Every custodian felt it. That subtle tremor beneath their discipline, a warmth stirring where only obedience once dwelled. But they dreamed now, though they were never meant to dream. And in those dreams a voice whispered, You were created to protect, not to blind. The Emperor's guardians began to question what it meant to serve. The first to fall was custodian Dorulven. He was found kneeling before the shattered statue of Saint Kefarian, his blade laid at its base. When questioned, he answered not with heresy, but truth. "I guard his throne," he said, "but not his heart." He was executed within the hour, yet 3 days later, 5 more refused to take the oath of obedience. They too were silenced, but their deaths did not end the contagion. It spread faster than before. By the month's end, half the custodian guard were seeing visions. Some claimed to hear the sun's voice in the hum of the throne's machinery. Others saw golden light flickering in the emperor's open eyes. The palace began to fracture from within. In the outer sanctum, where administratum scribes filed the endless decrees of the imperium, words began to vanish. Whole passages from the Codex Imperialis disappeared overnight, rewritten by invisible hands. Sermons praised the emperor's wrath, now spoke of his sorrow. The Inquisition intervened. Orders were sent to purge the anointed silence, as the growing movement was now called. But the agents sent to execute the orders never returned. They joined instead, for they too had dreamed. Far beyond Terra, in the void near the Segmentum Pacificus, warp storms began to shift. Their red maelstroms softened to gold. Ships passing through reported voices singing without words, as though the galaxy itself had begun to hum. Some captains wept and fell to their knees. Others went mad, claiming they saw a second sun blooming in the warp, radiant, sorrowful, infinite. The Imperium tried to explain it away. But explanations do not stop revelation. Everywhere the same phenomenon repeated. Psychers dreaming of light, mortals hearing forgiveness, and among the custodians a growing sense of unbearable clarity. Amonres could no longer remain. He gathered a small group of his brothers beneath the palace, those who had not yet been broken or silent. They met in the crypt where Valerian Kale had fallen, the chamber now glimmering faintly with residual gold. "We were taught that obedience is perfection," Amon said quietly, "but obedience without purpose is decay. We were made to protect mankind, not to blind it." Custodian Sarek leaned forward, whispering, "And what are we now, brother? Protectors or prisoners?" Amon looked toward the ceiling, as though seeing through the stone, through the world, toward the throne itself. "Perhaps both," he said. "But we have a choice now, to remain in silence or to give it voice." No one answered. None needed to, for the golden light had already begun to gather between them, coalescing in the shape of something human, something divine. The sun's essence manifested, faint but undeniable. "You meet, brothers," it said, its voice soft as the first dawn. "The father's cage is built of love twisted by fear. To free him, you must break what he made sacred." Sarek bowed his head. "We cannot defy." "You do not defy," the sun replied. "You remember." But it was enough. The following day, the rebellion of silence became real. Without order, without battle cries, without the noise of war, the custodians simply stopped. They stood before the throne and laid down their spears. They removed their helms and faced the withered form of the emperor, not as servants, but as sons. The ecclesiarch screamed heresy. The Inquisition raised its weapons, but the custodians did not move. Amon stepped forward, his voice calm. "My lord, we will no longer kill in your name. If you wish us destroyed, then destroy us yourself." The chamber shook. The throne blazed with golden light. Priests fell to their knees, shielding their eyes. A sound filled the air, not thunder, not wrath. The emperor opened his eyes. "Why?" Amon trembled. "Because mercy is stronger than command." The emperor's face was unreadable. His voice, when it came, was neither divine nor mortal. "He speaks through you." "Yes," Amon whispered, "and through all of us who remember him." The silence stretched deeper than space itself. Then a single tear fell from the emperor's eye, not of blood, but of light. Outside, across the galaxy, the Astronomicon flared. Its blinding beam dimmed for the first time in 10,000 years, replaced by a golden shimmer pulsed gently like a heartbeat. Warp storms parted. Planets long lost to madness felt the warmth of sunlight through clouds of decay. But not all rejoiced. The High Lords of Terror declared the custodians traitors. The ecclesiarchy called it the Second Heresy. Orders were sent to purge the palace. Yet as the armies gathered, they found the gates open unguarded. Inside there was no war, only silence, vast, infinite, holy. The custodians stood unarmed. The priests lowered their weapons, for in that silence they too heard the same voice. "You are forgiven." And though they did not understand, they wept, Far in the warp, the Auric sun looked toward Terra, his form radiant and vast. The rebellion had begun not with hatred, but with love, and love was something even the gods could not destroy. He whispered into the tide of eternity, "Our Father, they remember us." And somewhere within the throne, the Emperor's reply came faintly, barely audible, yet unmistakable. "Then I am not alone." For 10,000 years, the Emperor had been still. He had watched eternity unfold through eyes that could no longer close. His empire had become both monument and mausoleum, a kingdom of faith built upon the bones of reason. But now, for the first time in an age, he dreamed while awake. The dreams were not of conquest, nor of the Great Crusade. The Great Crusade. They were of light, golden, soft, familiar. The sun's presence lingered in the air like incense, filling every fracture of his dying consciousness. And beneath him, the world trembled. The rebellion of silence had spread beyond Terra. Across the segmentum solar, fleets halted in orbit, waiting for orders that never came. Vox channels filled not with commands, but with quiet hymns. Entire battalions knelt in their warships, heads bowed, whispering a single name, the Auric sun. On Mars, the Mechanicum's forges burned with new color, not red, but gold. The Omniscience priests proclaimed a nearer than hunger. Some wept, believing they had touched the true divinity emperor, once promised but had long withheld. Everywhere the same message spread. He is awake. Amun-Re stood at the foot of the golden throne. Around him, hundreds of custodians waited unarmed, faces bare. The emperor's light had begun to flicker erratically, bathing the chamber in waves of brilliance and shadow. "He sees us," Amun whispered. The words rippled through the hall, carried by awe and fear alike. The custodians knelt. The air grew heavy, alive with presence. Then came the voice. It was not thunder, nor divine decree. It was weary, soft, almost human. "Why did you stop obeying?" Amun dared to raise his eyes. "Because obedience without understanding is blindness, my lord. We wish to serve you truly." "Truly?" The emperor's voice trembled, ancient power struggling beneath emotion. "And what is truth, Amun-Re?" Amun did not answer. No words could bear the weight of that question. Instead, another voice spoke. Not from the room, but from everywhere. "His mercy, Father." The chamber blazed gold. Every machine shrieked, every priest fell to their knees. The sun's essence filled the air, not as form, but as light made conscious. His voice was calm, sorrowful, infinite. "You taught mankind to fear its gods. I would teach them to forgive them." The emperor's aura flared, shaking the marble foundations of the palace. "You were unmade." "No, Father," the sun said gently. "You buried me. But love does not decay." The throne screamed with psychic pressure. The astronomer flickered violently across the galaxy. Millions of psychers died instantly, consumed by the divine resonance of awakening. Yet in their final moments they smiled. They saw what no mortal had seen for millennia. The emperor of mankind weeping. Across the mperium, the warp shimmered with impossible light. Demons howled as entire realms dissolved into peace, a concept too alien for their existence. The Chaos Gods stirred uneasily, their endless laughter faltering. Something ancient was changing the fabric of their realm, an emotion older than hate, stronger than fear. Forgiveness. Within the throne room, the Emperor rose. The custodians watched in awe as the armor of gold cracked and fell away, revealing a body both decayed and divine. His eyes burned brighter than stars, his voice echoing through flesh and metal alike. "You would undo all I have built," he thundered. "Did you not see the cost of compassion?" "It weakens. It invites ruin." "No," the sun's voice answered from the golden light surrounding him. "It redeems." The two powers collided, will against mercy, divinity against humanity. The air rippled with psychic storms. Reality itself trembled. The custodians were thrown to their knees, blood streaming from their eyes, yet none fled. They watched gods argue not over power, but over purpose. "You would have mankind live without guidance," the Emperor roared. "I would have them live without chains." The Emperor raised his hand, light burning from his palm, the same light that had once forged stars and slain gods. But before he could strike, he saw the reflection within the sun's radiance, his own face, not the God King, not the master of mankind, but the man who had dreamed of peace long before he forgot what peace was. "You are me," he whispered. "The part you cast away," the sun replied. "The dream you killed to build your empire." The throne cracked beneath the weight of revelation. The Emperor staggered, his will faltering. Around him the custodians wept openly. The High Lords, watching from afar through psychic relay, fell silent, for they understood what they were witnessing. The Emperor was not fighting his son. He was fighting himself. Amon rose, voice trembling. My lord, if he is you, then to destroy him would be to destroy yourself. The Emperor looked into his custodian, and for the first time his eyes held no wrath, only exhaustion. Perhaps that is what must happen, he said softly. Perhaps I was never meant to endure. The sun's light dimmed, gentle as a hand upon his shoulder. Endure not as ruler, he said, but as memory. Let the dream end, father. Let mankind choose. The Emperor fell silent. The throne pulsed, its machinery screaming as it strained to contain the psychic storm building within him. Then, slowly, he nodded. Golden light erupted, filling the palace, the skies, the entire planet. Every soul on Terra felt it. The union of two wills, two dreams, merging into one final act of grace. Across the galaxy, warp storms calmed. Stars long thought dead flickered alive. For a moment, the mperium felt peace. And then, just as suddenly, the light vanished. When the brilliance faded, the golden throne stood empty. Hammon approached, trembling. The body was gone. Only a faint shimmer remained. The echo of warmth, the whisper of a dream fulfilled. Do not mourn. The voice came from ever and nowhere. Ve and I are one. The Emperor sleeps and the dream continues. The custodians bowed their heads. Outside, the sun over Terra shone brighter than it had in 10,000 years. The Emperor of mankind had awakened, not to rule, but to rest. The light that consumed Terra did not fade. It lingered, alive, radiant, defiant. For a heartbeat of eternity, the galaxy stood in stillness, drenched in gold. Then, as if reality itself gasped, the balance began to tilt. Emperor was gone from the throne, but he was not dead. Neither was the sun. Their merging had not ended the conflict. It had changed its form. The galaxy now stood between two halves of the same being, one of light, one of shadow, each struggling for dominion over the same soul. And that war was not fought in the material. It was waged within the warp itself. At first, the signs were beautiful. Psychers across 1,000 worlds saw visions of golden dawns, of peace made real. The Astronomicon pulsed steady and warm, guiding fleets without fail. For a brief moment, the Imperium dared to hope. But hope in the 41st millennium is fragile. The light soon began to fracture. Warp storms erupted anew, not in crimson as before, but in blinding white and black. Worlds disappeared into brilliance. Entire fleets were lost within storm-like suns and split, one half radiating warmth, the other despair. The scholars of Terra called it the Lamentation Divide. The Inquisition called it the Emperor's War within. Both were right. In the immaterium, beyond all mortal sight, the Emperor stood once more. Radiant, vast, infinite. Yet beside him stood another, identical but gentler. The auric sun, no longer memory or dream, but living essence. They faced each other upon a sea of souls, the warp storm calmed only by their will. Between them shimmered the reflection of humanity, fragile, luminous, and endlessly divided. You would undo me, the Emperor said, voice like the breaking of suns. Oh no, the sun replied softly. I would complete you. You cannot lead humanity through forgiveness, the Emperor thundered. They are too weak, too fearful. They are what we made them, the sun said, but they can become more. You taught them obedience. Let me teach them grace. The Emperor's power surged, galaxies flickering like candles in his anger. Yet the sun did not fight. He only spread his light wider, encompassing the shadows with compassion rather than destruction. The clash that followed was not battle, it was belief made war. Across the physical realm, the consequences were immediate. On Terra, storms of pure psychic radiance tore through the palace. The custodians fell to their knees, overwhelmed by visions. Some saw the Emperor as a god of wrath, burning away the unworthy. Others saw him as a father, embracing even the damned. The same entity seen through two different truths. Armies divided not by loyalty, but by interpretation. The Legion of Flame marched under banners of the old faith. Purity through domination, survival through obedience. The Order of the Auric Light rose to meet them. Warriors who fought not to kill, but to awaken. They wielded golden psionic energy that healed even as it burned. Brother fought brother, each believing they were saving humanity. Amon Reyes led the order. His armor, once gold, now shimmered with living light, a reflection of the sun's mercy. He carried no sword. Instead, his weapon was faith itself, forged from the remnants of Kael's crystal. On the field of the palace gardens, he faced the Legion's commander, Arch Custodian Rayleth. An old friend, you have betrayed everything we were made to protect, Raylis shouted, his blade dripping psychic fire. No, Ammon answered calmly. We are protecting what he loved, not what he became. Raylis struck first. The clash of their wills sent ripples across the sky. Gold and crimson collided, tearing the air apart. Statues of saints crumbled. Choirs fell silent. Yet as their battle raged, both men heard a voice. Two voices speaking as one. A stop they froze. The voice was the Emperor's. The voice was the Sun's. Two tones, harmonizing yet divided. You fight for me, it said, but you do not understand me. The warriors dropped to their knees, tears burning through their helms. The light faded. The war paused, but only for a moment. For in the warp, the conflict still burned. The Emperor and the Sun stood locked in a paradox, creation fighting compassion, eternity fighting the will to change. Every surge of divine rage shattered worlds. Every wave of mercy healed them again. The warp convulsed in their struggle, birthing and unmaking galaxies in the span of thought. You would destroy everything I built, the Emperor said, his voice echoing through time itself. No, the Sun replied. I would free it. Without me, mankind will fall. Without you, mankind will rise. The Emperor's fury faltered. The Sun stepped closer, his hand outstretched. You were never meant to rule them forever, Father. You were meant to teach them to walk without you. For a moment, the great storm quieted. The Emperor's gaze softened, the fire dimmed. But then came the screams. Billions of human souls across the galaxy, terrified of a universe without their god. Their fear fed him. Their worship strengthened his resolve. The Emperor straightened, burning once more with divine fury. It still need me. The Sun's light flickered, pained but resolute. Then I will save them from you. In that instant, the warp split. One half burned with the Emperor's wrath, endless fire, control and dominion. The other shone with the Sun's mercy, freedom, forgiveness and sorrow. The two halves collided, and the warp itself screamed. Across the galaxy, every psyker saw it. Two suns, one golden, one white, orbiting each other in eternal struggle. The war of light and shadow had begun. It was not a war of victory, it was a war of meaning. And in its heart, the Emperor whispered through the storm, his voice trembling between defiance and grief. I made you to save them, then let me do what you could not. The cosmos trembled. The light and the shadow became one endless horizon, a battle that was not for dominion, but for redemption. Verdun. The fate of the Imperium would be decided not by war, but by which truth humanity chose to believe. The throne of terror was never meant to move. It was the still heart of an empire that demanded silence, obedience, and eternity. Yet now, for the first time in 10,000 years, it shuddered. Not from battle, but from awakening. The war of light and shadow raged unseen through the warp, but its tremors reached the material realm. The great machinery that sustained the Emperor groaned like a dying god. Gold cracked, wires screamed. The astronomicon flickered in the heavens, pulsing like a failing heartbeat. On Terra, priests fell to their knees as the sky turned white, then black, then white again. Across the palace, the custodians stood motionless, torn between prayer. And at the center of it all, Amun-Riez knelt before the shaking throne, feeling the storm within his own soul. He could hear them both, father and son, their voices overlapping in an eternal argument of love and sorrow. They will fall without me, then let them learn to stand. Each word made the air vibrate with divine tension. Every syllable tore open the veil between flesh and faith. Ammon pressed his forehead to the marble floor. Oh my lord, you are tearing the world apart. No, the voices replied together. The world is tearing itself apart, deciding which of us it remembers. The Emperor's palace became a battlefield of belief. The Legion of Flame had fortified the upper levels, guarding what remained of the ecclesiarchs and the high lords. They declared that the Emperor's true divinity had returned, wrathful, unyielding, ready to purge impurity. They believed the golden light in the heavens was proof of his judgment. Below, the Order of the Auric Light prayed not for conquest, but for mercy. They carried Kale's words like scripture, whispering them before battle. Mercy is not surrender. It is strength without cruelty. When the two sides met beneath the dying skies of terror, their war was worthless. They fought as angels might, not for victory, but for truth. Bolters flashed, blades sang, psychic fire lit the clouds. Yet even as they slaughtered one another, their faces bore the same expression, reverence. They were dying for the same God, two reflections of a fractured faith. Ammon moved through the carnage like a shadow, unarmed. He felt every death as a wound within his soul. for each fallen warrior carried a fragment of the divine. He passed through fire and ruin until he reached the gates of the throne room, now cracked and glowing from within. As he approached, he heard the Emperor's voice, louder than before, more human, more desperate. "I see you, child. You carry his light." Amon froze. "My lord, I remember his face." The words came as a whisper, but they struck like thunder. The golden air around the throne pulsed, forming shifting silhouettes, the Emperor as he once was, and beside him, the sun, radiant and sorrowful. They were not separate now, but neither were they one. They stood facing each other within the storm, light merging and dividing in constant rhythm. "You would unmake me," the Emperor said. "I would unmake your cage. You do not understand. They worship me because they need me. They worship you because they fear themselves." Storm intensified, the throne cracked down the great mechanisms that powered it screamed as the Emperor's energy overloaded every conduit. Sparks of psychic fire rained like gold tears across the chamber. Outside, the skies over Terra shattered. Millions looked upward as the clouds split apart, revealing two suns, one brilliant gold, the other pale white. They circled each other like ancient rivals, their light flooding the world. Every mortal who looked upon them wept, though none knew why. In orbit, battle fleets powered down their weapons. On distant worlds, wars paused. The echo of the Emperor's voice carried through the warp, touching all of humanity at once. "You must choose." Back within the chamber, Amon cried out over the noise. "My lord, stop this. The galaxy cannot bear your conflict." The sun turned toward him, his expression calm. "This is not destruction, Amon. It is rebirth. They will die." "No," the sun said softly. "They will awaken." The Emperor's voice thundered, shaking the stones. "They are not ready. And neither were you." Her words silenced everything. The two beings faced one another, the air trembling with the weight of eternity. Then, for the first time, the Emperor lowered his head. "I wanted to save them," he said. "You did," the sun replied. "But now they must save themselves." Amon watched as the two forms, shadow and light, stepped closer. Their hands met. Golden radiance poured from their touch, spreading across the chamber, across the planet, across the galaxy itself. It was not destruction. It was fusion. The Emperor and the sun began to merge completely, two aspects of the same being resolving into harmony. As the light intensified, Amon felt his body dissolve into warmth. He heard millions of voices singing, not in fear, but in peace. He saw the faces of Kale, of fallen brothers, of mortals who had never known mercy, all smiling as if finally understood. Then, in the center of the light, he saw the Emperor as he once had been, human, radiant, flawed, kind. The sun stood beside him, not separate, not lesser. Together they spoke with one voice. "The time of gods has ended. The time of man begins." The throne shattered. The palace collapsed into light. The storm consumed everything, metal, stone, memory, gold remained. When the brilliance faded, the golden throne was empty once more. Amon awoke upon the marble steps, his armor scorched but intact. The air was calm. The war outside had ceased. No banners flew, no hymns were sung. The custodians stood in silence, gazing at the empty seat, and above them the sky burned with one sun, not gold, not white, but both. Amon fell to his knees, whispering the words that had become the Imperium's first honest prayer in 10,000 years. "He is free." And from the quiet beyond the stars, a voice answered, gentle, infinite, and content. "So are you." The light that had consumed terror was gone, leaving only stillness. For the first time in 10,000 years, the palace was quiet. Not the reverent hush of ritual, but the fragile silence of an empire holding its breath. The golden throne lay in ruin, cracked and hollow. Its divine occupant vanished. The galaxy waited for a god who would never return. And yet, in the absence of that god, something new began to stir. Across the stars, the warp storms that had once raged like wounded beasts calmed into golden haze. Demons screamed as their dominions collapsed into peace. The astronomicon flickered, not extinguished but transformed, pulsing softly like a living heart. The Emperor was gone from the throne, but his presence was everywhere, not as command, not as divinity, but as memory. On Terra, Amon-Rias stood at the foot of the shattered dais. His armor was cracked, his once immortal body trembling under the weight of what he had witnessed. All around him, custodians stood in silence. The scent of ash and sanctified oil lingered in the air. They did not know what to do. For 10 millennia, obedience had been their language. Now there were no orders left to follow. Aemon knelt, running his gauntleted hand over the cold marble of the throne. Beneath the surface, he felt warmth, faint, steady, like a dying ember that refused to fade. "You are still here," he whispered. A voice answered, not from the air, but from within his soul, and not as before. It was both the Emperor and the Sun, two tones woven into one, neither commanding nor pleading, only understanding. "What are you now?" Amon asked. "I'm a dream made whole, a promise kept." "And what of us?" "You are what we leave behind." Outside the ruined palace, the dawn rose over Terra. But it was not gold. It was white, pale and pure, washing over the spires of humanity's cradle. For the first time in centuries, sunlight reached the lower hives. The people, long blind to the heavens, looked upward and saw no icons, no banners, no divine visage, only light. In the silence that followed, no one shouted praise. No one begged for miracles. They simply breathed. It was enough. Far from terror, the mperium changed. The Adeptus Mechanicus, once obsessed with divine logic, began to question their They found no commandment from the Omnissiah, only an instinct to preserve life. Their machines hummed softer, guided by compassion instead of worship. The Inquisition fractured. Some sought to rebuild the old order, to crown a new god. Others turned inward, speaking of atonement rather than control. They called themselves the keepers of the quiet flame. Even the Astartes, those immortal sons of war, began to change. On a distant world in the eastern fringe, a chapter once known as the Iron Swords laid down their arms. Their Primaris captain burned their heraldry, declaring, "We were meant to defend mankind, not enslave it." The galaxy began to heal. Slowly, painfully, beautifully, but not all could accept it. On the shattered plains of Luna, remnants of the ecclesiarchy gathered around the corpse of faith. They screamed that the Emperor had abandoned them. Their prayers turned bitter, their psalms hateful. They saw the new light as blasphemy, the silence as death. In their desperation, they created a new god, a god of wrath, vengeance, and purity. They named it the Throne Reclaimed. Their temples spread like infection, promising certainty to those who could not bear ambiguity. The cycle began anew. Humanity, even freed, still yearned for chains. The Emperor's dream, even fulfilled, demanded struggle. Amon-Riaz watched from the palace balcony as the sun ascended fully over the horizon. His brothers stood behind him, uncertain. "Do we rebuild?" one asked. "Do we continue to rule?" asked another. Bon turned, his eyes weary but bright. "No, we remember." He walked among them, touching each shoulder in turn. The gesture of a father, not a commander. "We were made to protect mankind. We will do so still, but not by command. By choice." They bowed their heads, not in worship but in respect. As he passed through the shattered gates, Amon felt the warmth return, faint but constant, a whisper in his mind. "You lead them well. I only follow the light you left. Then the light endures." He smiled faintly. "And if they forget again, then they will dream again." That is what it means to be human. Elsewhere within the warp's heart, the Emperor's essence, now unified with the sun, drifted through the golden currents of eternity, no longer God, no longer ruler, but witness. He looked upon the galaxy not with judgment, but with wonder. Worlds that had known nothing but blood now shimmered with fragile peace. He saw humanity's cruelty and beauty intertwined, as it had always been. "They will fall again," the sun's voice whispered beside him. "I know," he answered, "but they will rise again too. But they will rise again." They stood together, father and son. Two lights merged into one eternal horizon. "You do regret it?" the sun asked. "And I understand it now." What was the lesson? That to love creation is to let it go, and for the first time in all of history, the Emperor, no longer divine, no longer chained, smiled. On Terra, the people began to tell a story, not of conquest, not of divinity, but of a god who chose to become a man again, and in doing so gave humanity back to itself. They called it the Second Dream. In time, the statues crumbled, the temples faded, and the stars themselves grew cold. Yet in the hearts of those who still dared to hope, a single truth remained, spoken in prayer not of fear, but of peace. The gods die not in fire, but in forgiveness. And somewhere, in a place beyond time, the light dimmed into calm. The dream ended, calm. The dream ended. But its echo lived on centuries past after the shattering of the throne. The world did not end. The stars did not die. Humanity did what it had always done, endured, but the galaxy that emerged from the light was no longer the same. The Imperium, as it had been, a labyrinth of faith, fear, and empire, was gone. In its place was something quieter, uncertain, and infinitely more fragile. They called it the Luminous Age. No banners flew from the spires of Terra now. No priests shouted from pulpits. The palace was a ruin-turned sanctuary, its broken halls filled with gardens grown from the ashes of war. Custodians walked its corridors in silence, not as warriors, but as keepers of memory. They no longer served a god. They served the truth of what had been. Amanrius still lived. Time, it seemed, had spared him, or perhaps it had simply forgotten him. His golden armor, once polished to divine brilliance, was dull and dented with age. His voice carried neither command nor prayer. He sat beneath the shattered dome of the throne room, where sunlight now spilled freely onto the marble floor. The air was filled with the hum of insects and the rustle of leaves. Before him lay a single relic, the broken seal of the Emperor's throne, now inert, cold. Engmon traced its edges, remembering the warmth that once radiated from it, a light that had consumed everything. "You are gone," he murmured. "Forgotten." A breeze moved through the chamber, soft as breath. In that sound, he thought he heard an answer. "Oh, you endure still, then? Are not as ruler, not as god, as choice?" Amon smiled faintly. "Then perhaps that is the truest immortality." The galaxy beyond Terra had changed too. The warp was no longer a storm of endless hate. It shimmered with muted color, the psychic tides gentler, almost serene. The demons had not vanished, chaos never does, but their laughter had dulled. Without worship, they withered, dominion shrinking into forgotten corners of unreality. Humanity no longer prayed to the Emperor as savior. They spoke his name as one speaks of memory, with reverence, not fear. Across the stars, new societies rose. On Mars, the priesthood abandoned its gods, embracing science as faith reborn. They called themselves the Forgers of Dawn. On Baal, the blood angels transformed their curse into covenant, vowing never again to spill blood in worship. And on Cadia's remnants, a world reforged from ruin, children played beneath skies no longer haunted by war, yet peace was never universal. Some still clung to the old ways, fragments of the ecclesiarchy, warlords who named themselves divine, admirals who claimed to serve the true emperor. Their fleets clashed against the new order, seeking to resurrect an empire that had already learned how to die. The galaxy did not heal all at once. It learned to breathe again slowly. In the centuries that followed, legends blurred into myth. Some claim that at times of great peril, a golden light still appeared among the stars. Not a weapon, not a god, but a whisper in the war, calming storms and guiding ships home. Others said they dreamed of a figure standing beneath a dying sun, smiling softly, saying nothing. The scholars called it superstition. The faithful called it the second dream. But those who had stood upon Terra during the shattering, those who had seen the light themselves, knew it was no myth. The Emperor's essence still watched, intertwined with the suns, their will one with the universe itself, not as masters, but as witnesses. One evening, as the twin moons of Terra rose, Amon walked. Flowers grew among the ruins, bright, resilient things that pushed through cracks in ancient stone. He looked up at the heavens and saw the stars flicker gently, alive with motion. Behind him a voice spoke. "You still wait." He turned. A young woman stood there, her robe simple, her eyes calm. She was one of the new scholars, the chroniclers of light, devoted to preserving history without worship. Amon nodded. "Waiting is what I was made for, and yet he no longer asks it of you." He smiled, old and kind. Perhaps not. Some habits even eternity cannot break. She sat beside him. "Do you believe he will ever return?" Amon looked to the stars. "He never left. He simply became what we were meant to be." "And what is that?" she asked. "A flawed," he said, "but capable of forgiveness." The woman was silent for a long time. Then she whispered, "Sometimes I dream of both of them, standing together." Amon closed his eyes, listening to the breeze move through the trees. Then the dream still lives. Guard it well. That night, as the world slept, Amon stood upon the highest tower of the ruined palace. The wind howled around him, carrying echoes of hymns long. He raised his gaze to the heavens, where a faint shimmer crossed the sky, a ribbon of gold and white entwined. For a moment he felt them both, the father and the son, watching not as guards, but as kin to all who struggled below. "We did our best," Amon was, and from the wind came the faintest reply, "And that is enough." When dawn came, the first rays of sunlight struck the broken throne. It glowed softly, as if remembering what it once was. No emperor sat upon it. No prayers filled its air, only peace. The people of Terra gathered that day in the gardens, not to worship, but to sing, not hymns of conquest, but songs of gratitude. Their voices carried through the ruins, echoing among the marble pillars, rising into the sky. And in the warp beyond, the light that had once been two hearts merged into one shimmered faintly, like the last breath of a dream refusing to fade. The galaxy moved, the galaxy slept beneath a sky reborn. No longer did the stars bleed red with war, no longer did the warp scream with hunger. There was silence now, not the silence of death, but of peace, a fragile, trembling peace, carried like a candle through the ruins of eternity. On Terra, dawn rose golden white, washing the broken palace and the wind moved through the hollow corridors, whispering through shattered pillars and fallen banners. Once, these halls had echoed with command. Now they breathed. Aman-Riaz stood alone upon the terrace of the throne room, overlooking the gardens that had overtaken the ruin. He was ancient beyond measure, yet his spirit felt lighter than it ever had. Around him, the air shimmered faintly, the remnants of the divine presence that once filled the world. He had lived to see gods die, empires crumble, and humanity learn to walk without its chain. He had seen the emperor fall and rise again, not as deity, but as dream. And now he felt the dream stirring once more. "You are quiet today," said a voice behind him. It was the young scholar again, the same woman who had once asked if he would return. She had grown older, though her eyes remained bright with wonder. Amon smiled faintly. "I am listening. But to what?" He turned his gaze to the horizon. The sunlight rippled like liquid gold over the sea. Their voices are softer now, like the tide. "Do you still believe he watches us?" she asked gently. Amon nodded. "Not as ruler, not as judge, but as witness, as love made memory." And none dreamed. Amon dreamed. Amon dreamed. He stood in the same place, the terrace above the gardens, but the world around him was alive with light. The ruins were whole again. The throne gleamed, as it once had, and the sky burned with gold. Yet there was no pain, no burden for worship. A figure stood beside him, tall, radiant, human. The emperor, and yet not. His armor was gone. His face was unscarred. The lines of agony were replaced with calm. Beside him stood another, the sun, the auric one, shining softly like the first dawn after endless night. They were not two people. They were harmony itself. The echo and the voice, the dream and the dreamer. "You came," Amon whispered. "I know. You never stop dreaming of us." Amon bowed his head, tears glinting in his eyes. "Is it over?" The sun smiled. "Nothing ends, everything changes." "Then what are we now? Are free," said the emperor, at last. He turned his gaze to the stars, no longer distant points of... "They endured, and in enduring they found what I could not. Forgiveness. And you?" Amon asked. "I forgave myself," he said softly. "That was the hardest battle of all." The sun stepped forward, placing a hand on Amon's shoulder. "I tell them our story. Hand you our story, not as faith, not as command, but as remembrance. Let them know that even gods can change." Amon nodded, his heart heavy with peace. "And if they forget," the emperor's eyes shimmered, "then we will dream again." The dream faded into starlight. When Amon awoke, the night was still. The air smelled of rain, though no clouds hung in the sky. He rose, walked to the broken dais, and touched the marble where the throne had once stood. It was warm. For a long moment he stood in silence. Then, gathering what strength remained, he began to speak. His voice echoed through the empty chamber, soft yet clear. He told the story of the emperor, not the god, but the man. Of the sun, not the weapon, but the heart. He spoke of ambition, love, and loss, of the empire that had drowned in its own divinity, of the light that forgave the dark. He spoke of a dream that refused to die, and beyond the palace walls, others listened. Pilgrims, scholars, and wanderers gathered in the gardens, drawn by a presence they could not name. They sat beneath the broken stars, hearing Amon's voice carry through the wind. His words were not scripture. They were remembrance. "Once," he said, "that there was a dream of unity. It failed because it was built on control. But from its ashes rose a greater truth, that to love creation, one must let it go." He paused, looking to the heavens where a faint glow shimmered beyond the clouds. Two lights intertwined, gold and white, orbiting one another. "The gods do not sit upon thrones," he said. "They walk among us, unseen in every act of mercy, in every choice to forgive. They are not rulers now." They are reflections of what we might become. The wind stilled, the crowd wept. Ammon's strength finally waned. He sank to his knees, smiling. "It is enough," he whispered. Remember." The light descended, soft, radiant, enveloping him. "Arrest, faithful one," a voice murmured. The dream continues. And then Valerian Amanrius, last of the Emperor's custodians, closed his eyes and vanished, not into death, but into light. Years later, children would play among the gardens of the palace. They would climb the old stones and watch the stars, telling stories of the two suns that shone in the heavens, the father and the son who once dreamed of humanity and learned, in the end, to be human themselves. No temples were built, no wars were fought. The story survived only in whispers, not as religion, but as memory. And in the quiet of eternity, far beyond mortal comprehension, the Emperor dreamed again. He stood beneath a dying sun beside the sun. Not in power, not in pain, but in peace. Was it worth it? The Emperor looked to the horizon, where new stars were forming. "Yes, because now they can dream without me." The sun smiled, then rest, Father. The Emperor closed his eyes. Light dimmed, stars shimmered once more. And somewhere, in the space between breaths, the last words of the mperium echoed through the endless dark. "The gods die not in fire, but in forgiveness."